Hi class, I'd like to go over a few file formats that we can use on the web, just so you can save out the right kind of files. Also keep in mind when you save pictures that a normal browser window wouldn't be much wider than 1500, maybe 2000 max pixels wide. So you don't need to save pictures that are 300 dpi, how many pixels wide. The smaller, the faster the loading. If you keep them 1500 pixels wide, I think it's pretty reasonable on most browsers these days. Here's an original photo that I just took with I'm not a great camera, but I did like this zoom in of the dragon that's on his feet there. And if I use the jpeg, that's the joint photographer group compression, it keeps 1,000,000 colors, which is good for photos, but it does become a little fuzzy depending on how much looseness you put on this compression itself. So if you zoom in really close, you can see the blocks, and the more you compress it, the bigger the blocks will become, and the bigger the steps will be visible between each of those squares. It does have millions of colors though. It records the changes of between the pixels in light and saturation and color. So if you have a lot of horizontal lines, it won't change that much than vertical lines, because every time it reads past that line it would have to change. And of course black and white would be very small pictures, and you get a lot of gray tones, which you don't get so much when you use GIF compression, because that's using 256 colors, and those are the web colors already defined. You can make a custom palette for it, which you might consider if you have a photo that has it just has like one color, let's say a logo, that you need to keep that brand color in there for sure. But you can see in between those colors it starts to get dithered. There are different kinds of meshes that you can put on the dithers, but you can see each of those little grains. When you zoom in very closely, there are only that many colors, but there's technically no compression because it's just using those colors, but it still keeps even like each pixel is still its own pixel. It doesn't compress into a larger field or so like JPEG. So those are, let's say, like 256 colors. You can condense that to 126 or 32 or 16 or 8. It's an 8-bit increment step of compression. This could be more useful for, let's say, text where you want something really crisp, because if you do, this is the regular text scan, if you compress that in the detail, like zoom in with JPEGs, you can see it has a little trouble to decide, is this a white or a black, and it makes these little artifacts in between that are little like sand, where it can't decide, but it has to jump to the next grayscale, so you do see those differences. But in a GIF you can narrow it down and make it a very white and a very black, so it would become crisper on some text scans, for example. So keep in mind you can use JPEGs. You can't use CMYK, that's the printing method. I already mentioned you shouldn't go beyond 1500 pixels. I think that's reasonable. The best thing would be an SVG. Those are vector files that you can use now, and they can actually even be animated and changed in the CSS. You can target them. But so a JPEG can't be transparent. It's always flat. A PNG was introduced when GIF for some reason started they had a copyright on it for a very short time, so the PNG Association made a new free file format, but then GIF became free because they couldn't compete with the price anyway. You can make a PNG that has a clear background, so if you want to have a logo that sits on top of a photo, let's say that, or and the other thing that a GIF can do, it can be animated, like those little loops you can do. Oh yeah, isn't that cool? It just animated, right? A great tip also is when you're working in Photoshop and you're saving JPEGs out, you want to, or PNGs or any kind of these web formats, you want to save them with the Command Option Shift. That's the Save for Web option. There are two different ways, but if you do it This way, instead of saving it as like a plain JPEG, it discards all of the preview files and the metadata and all the stuff that the file doesn't really need, and makes it even smaller than if you just save a simple JPEG. In that dialog box from the Save for Web file in Photoshop, you can define how many colors you give the GIF, and in the bottom left you can see how the memory of the file actually changes. So you can see how long it would take to load and what a difference it makes if you add more or less colors. So you can play around with that a little bit and decide which one's the best option. Thank you.